They always say your world flips upside down the moment you become a mother, that nothing, absolutely nothing, stays the same. That was true for me too, though not in the ways I had imagined. For me, the shift came not with tears of joy or overwhelming love, but with a sentence that knocked the breath clean out of my lungs. It happened the very first time my husband, Nathan, laid eyes on our newborn son. The moment should have been beautiful, sacred even, but instead it collapsed under the weight of what he said next. Nathan didn't smile, he didn't cry, he didn't even move toward us. He just stood there, staring at Noah, his face unreadable. And then, as if commenting on the weather, he said, "We should get a DNA test." The room fell into a silence so heavy it pressed against my skin. And just when I thought it couldn't get more surreal, he added, with a little sideways grin that made my stomach knot, "He's way too handsome to be mine." It was like someone had punched the air out of the hospital room. I was still in my gown, propped up in the bed, my arms wrapped protectively around tiny Noah, who had been in this world less than 6 hours. He was still warm from birth, skin pink and slightly wrinkled like a peach, breathing those soft little sighs that make your heart ache in the best way. And yet, here we were. For a brief moment I actually laughed, a short, brittle kind of laugh. Because what else do you do when the man you've loved and lived with for 4 years accuses your baby fresh from your body of not being his? But the laugh didn't land. No one else joined me. A nurse across the room gave a nervous chuckle, but it died in her throat. And my mother, Maggie, who had been scrolling through her iPad in the corner window seat, suddenly sat upright, her whole posture stiffening like she'd just been hit with a jolt of electricity. "Nathan," I said, really trying to keep my tone light, teasing. "What are you even talking about?" But he didn't smile. He didn't even blink. His arms were crossed now, eyes narrowing at Noah, examining his face like he was a code that needed cracking. That smug little grin still clung to his mouth. "I'm just saying," he replied with a careless shrug. "Those eyes, that head of hair, the dimple in his chin. I mean, come on. The kid looks like he walked out of a baby model catalog. There's no way he got all the good genes from me." The words hung there, ridiculous and yet razor sharp. I felt my face heat, not because I was flattered. Far from it. It wasn't a compliment. It was an accusation disguised as a joke, and the implication burned. My chest tightened, a slow constriction that made it harder and harder to take a full breath. I forced out another laugh, but this one came out thin, ghostly. "Wait, you're serious?" I asked. "You really want to do that? A DNA test?" He stepped closer to the bed then, close enough that I could smell the faint trace of aftershave on his collar. He leaned in, peering at Noah with a kind of cold curiosity that chilled me. "Just to be sure," he said, like we were talking about a minor errand, not the legitimacy of our son. Something in me snapped. My arms tightened instinctively around Noah, pulling him closer to my chest as if I could shield him from the strangeness in the room. His warmth was the only thing that grounded me in that moment, the only evidence that something real had happened. From the corner of my eye, I saw my mom rise silently from her chair, her arms folded tightly across her chest, her lips pressed into a thin, tight line, that look that said everything without a word. She'd never fully trusted Nathan, and standing there watching him with this chilling detachment, I wasn't sure I did either. I stared at the man who had kissed my forehead before every doctor's appointment, who had helped me hang watercolor prints in a nursery we painted pale sage green, who had whispered that he wanted to name our baby after his grandfather. But now, it was like a different man stood in his place, someone detached, clinical, already pulling away from us. "Just covering all the bases," he added with another shrug, like it was no big deal. But it was. God, it was. The room had changed. The joy, the softness, even Noah's gentle breathing, all of it felt shadowed by the words Nathan had spoken. Why did it sting so much? Why did I feel like I'd been split in two? Wasn't I enough? Didn't he trust me? I didn't have answers, not yet. But I knew one thing for certain. That moment, that one sentence turned everything upside down. It should have been the start of our family. Instead, it was the beginning of a slow unraveling I hadn't seen coming. And if you're still listening, still here with me, thank you. Sharing this isn't easy, but maybe, just maybe, someone out there needs to hear it. If this story resonates with something buried deep inside you, a doubt, a silence, a moment you've never been able to explain, then please consider liking this video or subscribing to the channel, not just to support me, but so that more stories like this, raw and unfiltered, can find the people who need them most. You'd think that after going through labor, after the sweat, the screaming, the surge of something so primal it left your soul cracked wide open, your only thoughts would be of your child, their fingers, tiny and impossibly delicate, their toes curled in perfect symmetry, the curve of their nose, the rhythm of their breath, the soft weight of them asleep against your chest. That's what they tell you motherhood is, a series of moments, stitched together by love so overwhelming it blurs everything else. But instead of being wrapped in that warm cocoon of wonder, I couldn't stop thinking about Nathan and the words he said in that hospital room. 2 days later, they discharged us. I wheeled Noah out of the maternity ward, while my mom, Maggie, carried the diaper bag and signed off the paperwork with a smile so tight it could have cracked glass. She insisted on staying with us for a while, saying it was to help me rest, but I knew her real reason. She didn't trust Nathan. Not alone, not anymore, and maybe never fully to begin with. I told her she was being overly cautious, maybe even unfair, but she didn't fight back. She just gave me that look, the one where her lips disappear into a thin line, and her eyes soften like she's mourning something she hasn't said out loud yet. Nathan, meanwhile, behaved like nothing had ever happened, like he hadn't just dropped a verbal bomb over our family's first hour of existence. He changed diapers, made those corny dad jokes that people find charming online, and even started flooding his Instagram with photos of Noah, calling him my little twin, or mini-me, already giving me attitude. He acted like a picture-perfect new dad, and I tried, God, I really did try, to believe that maybe what he said in the hospital was just a poorly timed, wildly miscalculated joke. Maybe he was just nervous. Maybe the birth had shaken him. Maybe he hadn't meant it. But something in me had shifted, quietly and permanently, like a hairline fracture that spreads with every step you take. It wasn't just the words anymore. It was the way he looked at Noah, not with affection, not even with doubt, but with calculation, like he was constantly trying to piece together a puzzle he didn't have the full box for. One night, I came out of the bathroom and saw him standing over Noah's bassinet, completely still. His back was to me, his shoulders squared, and he was leaning ever so slightly over the crib rail. He didn't notice I was watching. His brow was furrowed, his eyes narrowed, the way someone squints at a photograph, trying to remember why it seems familiar but slightly wrong. I stepped into the room and pretended I hadn't been observing him. He turned, startled just enough to make me flinch, then gave a quick laugh. "Just wondering when he's gonna start looking like me," he said, grinning like it was some harmless remark. I smiled back because I didn't know what else to do, but something in the way he said it made the hairs on the back of my neck rise. Then came the smaller things, the kind of moments you usually brush off, unless your nerves are already frayed and your instincts screaming. One afternoon, the phone rang, and it was a woman who introduced herself as Nurse Claire Thompson. Said she was calling from the hospital to do a standard postnatal follow-up. Her tone was polite, practiced, professional, until she asked for Noah's hospital ID number, and I heard her hesitate just for a second, like something wasn't matching up on her screen. I gave her the number anyway, and she paused again before saying, "Yes. Everything looks fine." I asked, "Are you sure?" But she doubled down, "Yes. Absolutely," though her voice carried a tension that didn't sit right. That night, after Nathan fell asleep, I pulled out every hospital document we had. I sat cross-legged on the living room floor under the dim yellow light and went through every paper, every wristband, every note. That's when I noticed it, a number on Noah's hospital bracelet that didn't match mine. Off by 1 digit, could have been a typo, a clerical error, something stupid and meaningless. But once that seed of doubt takes root, it grows fast and wild, wrapping around everything. I spent hours online reading horror stories about baby switches, hospital mix-ups, records misplaced or misfiled. I knew I was spiraling. I knew I looked ridiculous, sitting there with Noah sleeping peacefully beside me, while I went full conspiracy theorist at 2 a.m. But I couldn't help it. The next morning, I showed everything to Nathan. His response was immediate and sharp. "Are you serious right now?" He laughed, shaking his head. You're the one who freaked out when I even suggested something was off, and now you're the one acting like the baby might not be ours. I started to respond, but he talked right over me. Emily, come on, you just had a baby, you're exhausted, your hormones are crashing, don't let this mess with your head. He kissed my forehead and walked away, leaving me there, holding a folder of medical paperwork and the kind of unease that doesn't fade with reassurance. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe my brain was chemically scrambled from sleep deprivation and recovery. But if that were true, then why couldn't I stop feeling like something wasn't right? I started double-checking everything. His birth certificate, my prenatal ultrasound records, the ID tags, old appointment notes. I became that mom, the one with one hand rocking a newborn and the other typing paranoid queries into search bars. And the more I looked, the more I wondered, was Nathan really wrong to ask for that DNA test? The most unsettling part wasn't that he had asked. It was that I wasn't sure anymore if I wanted to say no. A few days passed, and he brought it up again. This time, not during a tense moment or argument, no dramatics. We were just having coffee. Noah was napping nearby in his little bassinet, sunlight streaming in through the curtains, and I was still half asleep when Nathan casually said, "So I found this private clinic. They do same-day paternity testing. It's reliable. Quiet. You don't even need a referral." I blinked at him. My brain was still foggy, slow to catch up. "You're still thinking about that?" He looked up from his mug and nodded. His expression was calm, too calm, not like someone who wanted peace, but like someone who had a story all planned and just needed me to follow the script. "I think it would help both of us," he said smoothly. "You've been anxious, distracted. I know you've been thinking about it too." I stared down at Noah, who had curled against my chest again in his sleep. His face twitched in a dream, lips puckering, and he let out a little sigh like he knew nothing of the storm building around him. And maybe Nathan was right. Maybe I had been different, not sleeping, second-guessing. But still, his tone wasn't loving. It wasn't supportive. It felt rehearsed, strategic, like he already knew where this story was going, and he was just waiting for me to catch up. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. Maybe I didn't really know the man I had married, or worse, maybe I had never known him at all. That night, sleep never came. I lay there in the dark, not out of fear that Nathan might harm Noah. No, that was never the kind of fear I had. It was something quieter but more disturbing. I couldn't stop glancing sideways at the man sleeping beside me, the man whose steady breathing used to bring me comfort but now only heightened my unease. Not because I thought he was dangerous, but because I was no longer sure who he really was, or if I ever had been. The next morning, with a resolve I didn't entirely recognize in myself, I called the hospital. I told the receptionist I had a few minor questions about Noah's birth records. Something small, something routine. She transferred me, first to one department, then another, and then again, until I found myself on the line with someone who identified herself as Ellen, a hospital administrator whose tone struck that unnerving chord between practiced courtesy and quiet defensiveness. "Everything looks in order on our end," she told me after a pause, just long enough to notice. "Healthy baby boy delivered at 3:42 a.m. No complications were recorded." I pressed gently, mentioned the mismatch on the hospital bracelets, how Noah's ID differed from mine by just a single digit. Ellen didn't miss a beat. "That can happen," she said too quickly. The kind of trained response meant to disarm. "We've since upgraded our labeling system to avoid such errors." Before I could get another word in, she cut the conversation short. "If you'd like official documentation, you'll need to contact patient records," she said, and with a hollow click, the line went dead. I sat frozen for a long time, phone still cradled in my palm, her voice echoing inside my skull. There was something too neat in her explanation, too rehearsed, as if everyone was reading from the same script, hoping that if they spoke the right lines often enough, the truth would disappear on its own. That afternoon, with Noah napping and Maggie occupied in the kitchen, I crept into the hallway closet where Nathan kept a metal lockbox of documents. The kind most people fill with old bills, warranties, and maybe the occasional passport. I told myself I was just looking to put my own mind at ease. But deep down, I knew I was chasing a feeling, trying to catch the tail of a suspicion that had already started to take shape. I opened the box and began sorting through his papers, bits and pieces of a life that suddenly felt curated. There were some adult IDs, a few tax forms, and his college diploma, but even that felt off. It didn't list a middle name. I stared at it for a long time, trying to recall if I'd ever heard him mention one. I couldn't. Had I just never thought to ask? Or had he made sure I never needed to? When I confronted him later that night, I brought it up casually, like it was nothing. Hey, how come there are no baby pictures of you? Or, high school stuff? He laughed, easy and unbothered. Remember I told you? House fire when I was a kid. Everything gone. Poof. Had he told me that, the memory was foggy. And the more I tried to replay it, the more I realized that my memory of him was full of these convenient blanks, little pockets of missing detail I had never thought to question. But now they felt like loose threads, and once I began pulling at them, I couldn't stop. Despite the storm unraveling inside me, I agreed to the DNA test. Not because I believed Noah wasn't ours. That was never truly the point. But because I needed certainty. Not about my son, but about Nathan. I didn't say any of that out loud, of course. I just nodded when he brought it up again, and the second I did, I saw something flicker in his face. He exhaled, not with concern, but with relief. And that was the moment I knew. He wasn't afraid of what the test would reveal. He was afraid that I would stop digging. The appointment was set for Thursday. Nathan handled every detail. He called the clinic, filled out the online forms, and scheduled the earliest available slot like he was booking a haircut. The morning of the test, he acted as though it were any other day. Calm, cheerful, detached. Meanwhile, my chest felt like it was wrapped in wires, each breath pulling against something sharp and invisible. Noah, blissfully unaware, lay in his car seat in the back seat of our SUV, eyes wide and curious as the morning sun filtered through the windows. He kept kicking off one tiny sock, a habit that always made me smile. That morning, I envied him, envied his innocence, his peace, his total freedom from the questions consuming me. We arrived, submitted the samples, one from me, one from Nathan, one from Noah, and were told results would take 5 business days. On the way out, Nathan made a half-hearted joke. Bet he's 80% angel, 20% trouble. I barely heard him. My thoughts were already spiraling. 5 days. 5 days to sit in that limbo. 5 days of pretending I wasn't unraveling, while the man I shared a home and a last name with may not have even been who he said he was. That night, I lay in bed again, pretending to scroll my phone while Nathan drifted off beside me. My brain wouldn't stop looping his story about the house fire. It felt too clean, too ready, the kind of anecdote you keep in your back pocket when you need to shut down questions. Why couldn't I remember him ever telling it before? The next morning, with an excuse about needing to pick up Noah's baby blanket from the hospital, one with his name embroidered on it, which didn't even exist, I left him with Maggie and drove back to the maternity ward. My heart pounded the whole way there. When I arrived, the front desk waved me through, and I made a beeline for Nurse Claire, the one whose voice had trembled ever so slightly during that strange follow-up call. She recognized me right away. "Emily, right? How's the little one doing?" "Good," I said, then lowered my voice. "But I have a weird question." I told her about the ID discrepancy, the strange phone call, the missing digit. I expected her to reassure me, to laugh it off, to tell me I was overthinking. But instead, her face paled. "I probably shouldn't say anything," she murmured, eyes darting around. But that night, there was a flag discrepancy for a moment. The system showed 2 newborns under your ID number. It was corrected within minutes. Management said it was a tech glitch and told us to let it go. The blood drained from my face. "Was Noah ever taken out of the room without me?" I asked. She hesitated. "For a routine check, briefly. But only for a minute." "How long is briefly?" I pressed. She didn't answer. I left the hospital in a fog, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel, the words 2 babies under your ID, repeating over and over like a broken metronome in my mind. I couldn't tell Nathan what I had learned. Not yet. I needed more. So I turned to the places I never imagined I'd go. Online archives, social media, public records. I typed his name into every database I could access, scrolled through graduation lists, yearbooks, obituaries, And the deeper I dug, the more impossible it became to find him. No high school, no childhood photos, no tagged friends from before 2012. It was like Nathan Brooks had appeared, fully formed, the day he turned 21. And suddenly I realized I wasn't just searching for answers. I was chasing a ghost. I found myself staring at a blank profile picture on an old alumni registry from Westfield College, a digital ghost where a life should have been. No clubs, no photos, no memories left behind by classmates. Just a name, Nathan Brooks, floating in a void. And in that moment, something inside me twisted. I had agreed to the DNA test to prove that Noah belonged to both of us, to finally quiet the gnawing doubts that had been clawing at the back of my mind. But now, I didn't know what scared me more. The slim chance that Noah wasn't his, or the far darker realization that maybe Nathan wasn't even Nathan at all. The call came early, on a Wednesday morning that felt like any other, until it wasn't. I was in the kitchen, barefoot in flannel pajama pants, rocking Noah in one arm while reheating yesterday's coffee, when my phone rang. The caller ID displayed nothing but unknown number. For a second, my thumb hovered above the decline button, a strange chill threading through me. But then I answered. Mrs. Carter? A clipped, calm male voice. This is Dr. Whitman from Greenbrook Medical. We need you and your husband to come in today regarding your paternity test results. It's important that we speak in person. I repeated the words, in person, as if saying them out loud might dull their edge. Yes, he replied, it's urgent. My stomach plummeted. I couldn't find words, only managed a shaky nod he couldn't see. When I told Nathan, he didn't even blink. He just muttered finally, grabbed his keys from the hook by the door, and walked to the car like he'd been waiting for this moment to arrive. The drive to the clinic was wrapped in silence. Noah slept in the back seat, curled like a comma in his car seat, soft breaths rising and falling as if the world around him hadn't cracked open. I stared out the window, one palm pressed flat against my thigh, the other clenched into a fist around my phone. When we arrived, a nurse led us through a narrow hallway and into a small consultation room. It was sterile, not just clean, but cold, like a place meant for hard truths. The air conditioning hummed faintly. A digital wall clock ticked off each passing second, like a gavel striking wood. Every inch of me felt taut, like my skin had been stretched too tight. Dr. Whitman entered with a folder in hand and a furrow between his brows. He looked like the kind of man who never wasted words, graying hair, pressed collar, eyes that scanned too quickly. He sat across from us, opened the file, and then paused, just long enough for my heart to seize. I'll be direct, he began. The results have come in, and they are highly unusual. I instinctively clutched Noah closer, burying my nose in the downy curve of his head, desperate to anchor myself in something real, something mine. Dr. Whitman looked at me first. Emily, he said gently, biologically, this child is not related to Nathan. I didn't flinch. Deep inside, I had already known. It wasn't shock I felt, but confirmation, cold, brutal, and strangely quiet. But then the doctor turned his gaze to Nathan, and something changed. He didn't speak immediately. He studied him, and for the first time since we sat down, I saw hesitation, maybe even unease in Dr. Whitman's face. And Nathan, he continued, this time his voice lower, laced with something closer to dread. You are not a biological match for this child, but more importantly, your DNA doesn't align with any existing medical records linked to the identity you submitted. Nathan went still. I turned to him, expecting confusion, denial, outrage, anything human, but his expression didn't waver. Not even a twitch. Dr. Whitman closed the folder with a quiet snap. We ran a cross-check through several databases, he said. Your name, date of birth, address history, even your photo. Every element triggered a federal alert. My vision swam. What are you saying? I managed to whisper, though the words barely left my throat. The doctor didn't answer me. Instead, he lifted the phone on his desk, pressed a button, and calmly said a sentence that hollowed me out. Security, we need you in room 4, now. Time didn't just slow, it fractured. I turned toward Nathan, and for the briefest moment, something flickered in his eyes. Not surprise, not guilt, but panic. Real, raw panic. Then, Just as quickly, it vanished behind a mask.
What the hell is this? He barked, rising from his chair. You think I'm what, a fraud? A con man?
Dr. Whitman didn't flinch. We don't think, he said flatly. We know. Your DNA matches a man named Jason Cole, formerly David Langston, arrested in 2014 and released on bail. He vanished shortly after. The real Nathan Brooks died in a car crash a year later. We suspect you've been living under his name ever since. I felt my entire body go hollow. The man I had married, the man who painted a nursery, the man who whispered baby names in my ear. He wasn't just hiding something, he was someone else entirely. Two uniformed security officers entered, and the room shrank around us. Nathan, no, Jason turned to me. And there it was. Not rage, not desperation, but a kind of quiet sadness in his eyes, like he had wanted to keep the illusion going just a little longer. They led him out in silence, and I didn't cry. Not when the handcuffs clicked. Not when the door slammed shut behind him. Not even when Dr. Whitman slid the printed DNA results across the table like a final verdict. I just sat there, numb, holding Noah against my chest, his tiny head tucked under my chin, his breath warm, his presence the only thing tethering me to the room, to my body, to this world. The days that followed felt like wading through syrup, slow, heavy, surreal. The story hit the news almost immediately. Man arrested for living under stolen identity, suspected fraud, involved in paternity scandal. They called it a bizarre family drama with a criminal twist. I hated every headline. This wasn't a story, it was my life. Over time, I learned more about Jason, or whatever his real name had once been. He had spent years switching identities, evading charges, jumping states like stepping stones, credit fraud, loan scams. Nothing violent, nothing dramatic, but the lies ran deep, and so did the manipulation. He had inserted himself into my life with precision. He hadn't just fooled me. He had constructed an entire man, a version of himself tailored to what I needed, what I hoped for. But here's what haunted me most. While I had feared that Noah might not be his, the truth was worse. He had known Noah was mine. He had used that tiny glitch at the hospital, the bracelet discrepancy, the nurse's hesitation, the system error to plant doubt in me, to control the narrative, to distract me from questioning him.
He wasn't just a liar.
He was a master at using love against you. For a long time after he was gone, I couldn't stop turning the blame inward. Like a stone in my hand that I kept rubbing raw, I replayed everything in my mind. Every birthday we spent together, every stolen moment of laughter, every quiet I love you whispered in the dark when we thought the rest of the world was asleep. I searched those memories like they were a crime scene, hoping to find the fracture, the flicker, the sign I'd somehow missed. But the truth is, people like Jason, like the man I knew as Nathan, they're not just liars, they're shapeshifters. They learn how to mirror you, how to mold themselves into whatever you need most. And they're so good at it, you never realize you've been living in a script until the curtain finally drops. But even through all the betrayal, all the disorientation, what shook me the most wasn't him. It was Noah. For weeks, my worst fear had been that he wasn't mine, that something had gone horribly wrong, that in those fragile hours after birth, amidst the chaos and exhaustion, I had somehow taken home a baby that wasn't mine to begin with. But after the investigation, after all the interviews and records were rechecked, the hospital confirmed what Nurse Claire had tried to hint at that day with her too careful words. Yes, there had been a glitch in the system, a brief terrifying moment where two babies were mistakenly tagged under my ID, but the error had been caught before discharge. Corrected, closed. Noah had never left my side long enough to be taken. He was mine from his very first breath, from that small, perfect gasp of air that sealed our bond before I even had time to fully understand what motherhood meant. And yet, somehow, Jason had weaponized even that brief error. He took something that could have been an honest mistake and used it as a smokescreen, something to cast doubt, something to keep me from asking the more dangerous question. Who was he really? He fed the fear slowly, like a drip, making me believe I was the one unraveling, until I forgot to follow the thread that led back to him.
It was clever, it was cruel, and it was calculated down to the last breath.
It took me weeks before I could say his real name aloud. even longer before I stopped hearing Nathan in my own head every time I looked at the empty half of the bed. There's a strange kind of grief that comes with losing someone who never really existed, a mourning for the version of them you created in your heart. But eventually, the echoes faded. Now it's just me and Noah. We moved back in with my mom, Maggie, for a while. She never said "I told you so," never rubbed salt into a wound that was already splitting me open. She just made tea, kept the lights low, and sat beside me in the silence until I was ready to fall apart. And when I did, finally completely, she held me the way only a mother can. And when she holds Noah, it's as if he's the sun itself, because to me, that's exactly what he is. I filed for annulment. There were no complications. Apparently, it's quite simple to dissolve a marriage to someone who never legally existed in the first place. No drawn-out hearings, no custody battles, just paperwork and the cold sting of reality. Sometimes mail still arrives addressed to Nathan Brooks. I don't even open it. I tear it in half and drop it into the trash, the same way I've been learning to discard the remnants of that life. But some nights when Noah is asleep in his crib and the house sinks into that strange, echoing quiet, I catch myself thinking about him. Not Jason, not the liar, but the version of him I believed in. The one who sang off-key lullabies at 3 a.m. The one who painted the nursery walls, sage green, and smiled at every sonogram like it was the first time. Was any of that real? Or just part of the illusion he wore so well? I'll never know, and I'm learning to be okay with that. Because here's the thing no one tells you about the truth. It doesn't just hurt, it shatters. It breaks the ground beneath you so violently that you have to rebuild from nothing, forced to construct a new self from the wreckage of everything you thought you knew. But that rebuilding, as brutal and slow as it is, makes you stronger, makes you sharper. It chisels away everything fake and leaves only what's real. And what's real, what's enduring, is Noah. I found myself in that storm, but more importantly, I found him, and that is more than enough. Thank you for being here, for staying with me through this story. I know it's not the kind of tale you expect when you click on a video, but sometimes it's the messy, unvarnished truths that remind us who we are. If you've ever stood at the edge of doubt, if you've ever questioned your reality, your relationships, your instincts, please know you're not alone.